So let's talk about hate crimes. We've been talking here last year, and ever since I've been following the numbers, and despite everybody's talking about hate crimes, and if you're Jewish, about anti-Semitism, the figures are growing. So are we counting differently, or is the problem just getting bigger and bigger?
I would say that on the one side, really the problem is getting bigger, and what we see is, as it was just said, just the official numbers. And the real pictures is far darker, to use the expression of how the situation for society is. Because what I really think, and what we just heard, is that the anti-Semitism and the rise of hatred against Jews is just the seismograph for the situation of our society. And there's a lot of impact taking place because those people, those groups, those organizations who want to spread hate, who want to change the societies, if it's in Europe, if it's in the United States or different, they are on the track. And they use all those social networks, they use all the possibilities to spread hate. And so we come from what we heard from education to instruments of keeping society together, and to the questions of law enforcement and really fighting anti-Semitism and all the other forms of xenophobia, anti-Islamism, and all the groups that are on their track. So it's up to us, it's rising, and it's up to the locals especially to do what's making the world on the ground.
Mr. Forbes, how do you see it?
We won't solve the rise of hate crimes by counting better. What we need to do is understand what's driving communities apart, what's creating the sense of unfairness, injustice that some people feel, that then turns itself into political rhetoric that turns communities against each other. And I think that a big part of it is economic instability. We've been through, certainly in my country, a decade now of virtually no economic growth. Is it any wonder that we're starting to see a rise in disenchantment with the system? And when people aren't satisfied with their lives, they look for people to blame. And I think that's one of the underlying reasons why we're seeing an increase in hate crimes of all sorts. So I think what we have to do is, and this is, I think, a really important role for city leaders and place leaders, we have to focus our efforts on supporting our economy, creating jobs, because the evidence shows that when you have a buoyant economy and people feel secure in employment and feel they have a stake in the future, hate crimes start to diminish.
Lior Hayat, you have both hats, being a counsel in Miami, and seeing lots of hate crimes and anti-Semitism in the States, living in Florida, and currently sitting in a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, overlooking the whole world and counting numbers and other cases, and having to decide what to do, if at all.
First of all, I do agree. It's easier to count today. The people who spread hate have a better way of spreading the hate, and we have a better way of receiving the message through social media. So if you look in Twitter, for example, you'll find hate crimes every single second because it's there, and it's easier for them to send this message to the masses. In the past, we used to have the gatekeepers, the journalists, the editors that would have stopped the message somewhere or somehow, and now there's no gatekeeper. So that's true. I'm not sure we have more anti-Semitism, but clearly it's more central today, or more hate crimes or hate language in total. But I, as a former Consul General of Israel in Florida, I understood the power of a diplomacy going from bottom up. Most of the diplomats work with central governments, with federal governments. This is what we do. We talk to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we talk to the Prime Minister or President, and the power of most of the people the citizens have no connection to that level. The citizens live in the cities, and they have the connection with their own public or representative or elected officials, which are the mayors or the consul, commissioners and consulmen. And then we have to work with them as well. And we expect them to be opinion leaders against anti-Semitism. In certain ways, I'll talk about a few of them, but also we expect them to be educators. I'll give one example. Next week in Belgium, there is a festival, Horst Festival, in one of the cities that actually shows figures of ultra-Orthodox Jews, ridiculous ultra-Orthodox Jews, and the mayor supports this activity that was, by the way, supported by UNESCO and by the government of Belgium, and he said, no, this is part of our tradition. Defending anti-Semitism as part of his tradition. We're in the 21st century. This should have been gone in 1945, but we're still fighting anti-Semitism. It's way worse than one crazy person tweeting on Twitter his hate crimes.
So, Leo, I want to follow up on that, starting with you. In the past, you know, a person lived in a village, and what he knew was his village, and maybe once in a while he went to the big city. Currently, because of the smartphones and Facebook, etc., we are everyone is everywhere, and you can get each and every information at any given moment. Councillor Forbes spoke of leaders having to work with their communities, but the effect of information can come to Newcastle from anywhere in the world. I mean, so it's a flat world, and by that time it changed dramatically. How do we tackle that? Do we just pour information on ignorance, or we do other things?
I firmly believe in education. We have to start by educating people. Educating against hate is one of the ways, but educating them how to read or to receive information. This is the most important thing. We are in the age of information. I remember when I went to university, they said we are starting a new age when people can get information from everywhere, and it's a great thing. And then we saw that information, if you don't level it, or anyone can be a journalist, and everyone can be spreading information, whether it's, I'll use the term fake news, but I'm not politically taking sides politically, but fake news is everywhere, and we have to educate people how to determine whether the news is legitimate or not. And there's another level. We have to create the club of the good guys. In a way, we have people all over the world that understand the importance of fighting discrimination, racism, and anti-Semitism. They all come from the same root, and probably xenophobia, and probably also other kinds of hate crimes, and to create a club of mayors that will support a level, a standard of in their cities, those crimes will not be allowed. And if we'll start with 10 cities and 100 cities, 1,000 cities, in a few years, every mayor in the world will be eager to be part of this club, wouldn't be have this medal on his chest saying, we're
So there is such a club that Chaim Bibas, the mayor of Modi'in, the CEO of the municipalities in Israel, and Mayor Becker, and a fellow of the, from Florida, started. I want to ask you, Councillor Forbes, you spoke of, you know, economic situation. We saw it with ISIS, for example. Thousands of Europeans going and buying one-way tickets, going to Syria to join this organization at the time, because they were living on a very fragile ground. Either it could be Britain, it could be France, or other places, going there and then having no lives. I believe it's the same thing, right, that you want to tackle.
And we saw it most recently in Britain in the referendum to leave the EU. And can I just say, you may hear some politicians in Britain making some pretty right-wing xenophobic comments. That is not the country that I represent. That's not the country that I stand for. I stand for a Britain which is open, welcoming, acceptant, vibrant, and multicultural. And please, if there's one thing that you take away from this session, please don't listen to people like my Prime Minister, because that doesn't represent the Britain that I believe in.
And he comes from the city of Alan Shearer.
But the point I wanted to make around the Brexit referendum, the tenor of the public debate in Britain in 2016 was awful. The there was a naked racism in the debate around Brexit and whether or not to leave the European Union. And a lot of people voted to leave because they thought that they would rid the country of foreigners as they saw it. And I think that's not just a crystallization of decades of grievances, it's a collective failure of our political leadership in our country not to stamp that out before it became an issue. And I feel, I have to say, deeply sorry about the result of that referendum. I'm deeply worried about the future of my country and the lessons that I'm learning from my colleagues here around a network of international politicians willing to stand up for what we believe is right and to shape places that we believe are right and just and fair is the kind of leadership that we must show in local government, because it's not going to come from our national government.
Whoa. Very impressive. Mayor Becker, if from my visits around the world, if there is one country to study from, is Germany. I mean, you confront your past and you try to educate better. I think even the way you teach Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, is in many terms is better than the way Israel teaches it to our children being Jewish. But still you see a rise in the numbers, so maybe there is something that you're doing wrong, or maybe the system that was built after 1945 is not relevant anymore to 2020.
Well, I would say we are not doing things wrong, but we have to adopt things to the present situation. The most fruitful ground for anti-Semitism, to my mind, is a lack of knowledge, because people have Jewish life in mind, even that they don't know anything about Jewish life, because of course we are dealing with the time of the Shoah, teaching it at school, but what especially also young people do not learn is how does Jewish life looks in the 21st century. I would make it very hard. The average German pupil learns, it's very sharply spoken, learns that in 1933 there were instantly Jews and Nazis in Germany, and then the Nazis killed the Jews, and in 1945 they all were diminished. That is what I mean about the focus. The focus is not about what is Jewish life. We will celebrate next year in Germany 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany. Many people just learn about the time of the victims, and the image of Jewish people, of Jews being victims, is the one that is transported. So there's one issue about how to bring over the pride, the support, the engagement.
The big story.
Yeah, the big story, and especially when you see the development, if it's our state of Hessen, if it's the city of Frankfurt, if it's Germany, the contribution of Jewish families in the past has so strongly helped to develop the country, so Jewish life is part of the identity of Germany and of Germans.
But are people, children, are they interested at all studying about that currently? Because it's the world and world of opportunities is endless. And I see my kids and others, you know, if there is no problem, why studying about problems? So they want to study about other stuff. And it's hard as leaders to force them to study about something that you foresee that might happen in the future, but they don't want to do it.
Well, they want to do it when they see that it affects their personal life. And that is what we are discussing, because it affects in the way of hatred is spread, how society gets divided. Because we see that people are on the street who has nothing else in mind than dividing our society. And so it divides, and it comes to their very personal issues. And so education is a strong issue to really bring over how we keep society together. And it's not only about educating the children, but we have to educate those who educate. So that teachers learn when they hear the word Jew being used as a bad name at the schoolyard, how to confront the young people about what are you saying, why are you saying this? And when it comes to question about the Middle East, when people say, hey, you're killing kids there, as something they learn from their home or from Al Jazeera that they hear at home. So there is a lot of things really to be taken on.
One additional thing to that, most children usually say what they hear at home. So we're talking about teaching youngsters, but we have a huge problem with adults.
Definitely. I mean, if you see that the anti-Semitism goes from the far right to the far left, from the detour over anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism, and especially also people that coming from this region who teach that Jews are bad, and especially Israeli Jews are the worst. So you really have to deal with this situation, and they don't even see like the Shoah being part of their CV. So you have to come over and say, from the guilt of the past, we have the responsibility for the future. And that is something that really can work, and we see that the approach that has been done now works in the way that you have to multiply, and you have to have people that, even when we speak about the social media as the influencers who have to be used there. People are living in their social bubbles in the social network. And the algorithm of Facebook makes it that you only see and discuss with people who have your own opinion. So the news that you get are your own words and your own thoughts. And we have to really work on that and get people on the net that are influencing people in the good situation, who are ideal people, and that is something I think we can use much stronger than we do presently.
So, Councillor Forbes, Mayor Becker spoke of anti-Semitism, but it's more than that. We were talking about hate crimes and hate in large, and I lived in London nearly 30 years ago, and at that time, you know, the Indo-Pakistani minorities were on the focus, and later it was the Afro-American or Afro communities that were on the focus. And in the past few years, I heard that Polish minorities and others, it changes from the years, but the hate issue remains.
It does, and I think it comes from a sense of moral superiority that some people have about other people, and that is reinforced through the way that we teach our history, because history in Britain is taught from the perspective of the Industrial Revolution, the fact that Britain went on to rule the waves, literally, economically, the empire, and the post-empire period. So, interspersed with 2 world wars where we are taught Britain was victorious. And so we have a particular slant on the way that we see our country's history, which doesn't allow people from other cultures to easily sit within our national narrative. And that's why I think you see the continued tension between different groups in society, because there is a kind of perceived accepted norm of the narrative of a country and its history, and if they aren't part of that, then they're seen as outsiders and therefore fair game. And so for me, part of what we have to do, it comes back to your point and your point around schools and education, is find a much more inclusive way of telling our history, which is why I think, for example, the Holocaust Memorial Day is so important, because listening to the testimony of people who survived the Holocaust is one of the most powerful things that we can do to keep their memory alive. And my worry is that we are very good at forgetting our history, and therefore we're liable to repeat the mistakes that people made in the past.
One more thing regarding education, Leo, and maybe talking about how to explain your cause. You're now in charge of Israel's face around the world, because you're the spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Israel is blamed all the time. On one hand, we are the casualties of past atrocities, but currently half the world blame us for billions of things that some of them maybe we are responsible for, and most of them we're not. How do you hold this stick from both ends? Because you see many UN organizations, for example, that are being supported by states that, let's say, are a little bit less democratic than Israel, blame us for doing things that sometimes are hilarious.
I totally agree. I think that Israel is in a tough spot, because with all the legitimate criticism about Israel and its politics, and I do think that a lot of the criticism is legitimate and we can face it. There's a lot of illegitimate criticism that is driven by...
And fake news, as you said. Lots of fake news.
A lot of fake news, but it's driven by anti-Semitism. It's in its worst way, and it's true that I've been the Consul General in Miami, which is probably the most pro-Israel place on earth. They're even more, they are even more pro-Israel than we are, in a way. And but I served in Europe as well. I served in Spain for 4 years, and I've seen the other side of the anti-Semitism. And one of the journalists in Spain once told me that Europeans are not willing to accept Israel because this is not the role that they consider to be the role that the Jews should play in history. They would like to feel sorry for Israel, but Israel, we created Israel in order not to be victims again, and every reaction by Israel will be disproportional, because the proportional reaction is to be the victim. And I'm not taking it further because I'm trying to remain diplomatic here, and there is a issue of image of Jews, and the fact that Israel breaks part of the image of the victim Jew in Europe, and the fact that Europeans are looking, a lot of Europeans are looking in Israel and saying, this is not what we expect of Israel to do. This is why the support for Israel was huge between 1948 till 1967, and all of a sudden Israel showed that we are no longer the weak side in this conflict, and all of a sudden said, okay, this is not what we expect of you to do. So I do believe that we have to separate the legitimate criticism, and we can deal with it, and we have a lot of criticism in Israel regarding our policy, and the illegitimate that is driven by anti-Zionism, which is one side of anti-Semitism, and
so
we should say it clearly.
Yes, we spoke of the problem and at least one solution, which is education. I want to ask you both, Mayor Becker and Councillor Forbes, we started this morning by speaking of, for example, safe cities or smart cities. That enables you to give lots of solutions for practical hate crimes, hate attacks that are not on the web, or maybe some of them there are. Which methods are you using in your city, for example?
Well, it starts with what we have like a council of religions, where the representatives of the different religious groups mingle together to debate and discuss about the situation within their communities, things that they see, development that they see, how to cooperate. And so really to go on the focus and show what we have in common and what they have in common is the one issue. What other thing I would like to see, we have in Germany, especially in Germany, other places in Europe too, this Fridays for Future movement, which is the unique example that young people now go on the street, fight for the future of the climate of this planet. Sometimes I would wish that the whole society would go on the streets and fight for the climate of society. And I think that giving this impulse to the other parts of our society is something that a city can do, and we're encouraging groups, we're encouraging NGOs to be part of that.
But if I touch technology, cyber opportunities, it lets you do billions of things. For example, in the past, if Leo wanted to speak to a crowd, you had to go to a school in Miami and to speak to 500 students. Now, by the web, you can approach unlimited number of people at any given moment. I mean, it enables you to do many things you couldn't do in the past.
Yeah, and you have to be part of that game too. You have to be active there. You have to, but at the end, you have to have people who are influencers, who are influencing with the way. And if you have like a Muslim influencer coming from Europe, going to Tel Aviv and showing the real life that is taking place here, this has so much impact on those prejudices that people have in mind. And these are little stones in this mosaic that we are working on, and so you have to be part, and especially in this virtual battle that we have to deal with.
Councillor Forbes?
One of the things I tell my colleagues when they're elected is that the more senior you get in politics, the less you lose your right to speak your mind. And what I mean by that is the more responsibility you take on in politics, the greater responsibility you have to set a tone and a set of values consistently in the way that you speak, the way that you put stuff out on social media, the way that you interact with your communities. And I've had challenges with some of my colleagues in the Labour Party in Britain, in Newcastle, who absolutely have that view that the creation of Israel is somehow a racist endeavour. The very fact that Israel exists, so they believe it, and I've had to explain to them that they cannot hold that view and hold elected public office. It's incompatible with our city's values. And most of them learn and change their minds, and some of them aren't members of the party anymore.
I'm glad to hear that.
Lior, last words.
I do believe in the power of elected officials, but I want to talk about one special program that we had in Miami that is we were involved in, and also ADL that were speaking just before us, called Football Unites. And when I talk about Football Unites, I talk about the real football, the American one, just kidding. And they understood that there are a lot of people in Miami. Miami is probably the most diverse city in the world. There are people from Latin America. There are people from other countries. 67% of the people living in Miami weren't born in the U.S. or weren't born in Florida. And they decided that they'll bring teenagers to play football together from different neighborhoods. So the first time that Jewish kids played football with Afro-American kids and with Latino kids were on the field of the Miami Dolphins. I was proud to be part of this initiative. And I think it's true, we have a responsibility as leaders, as politicians, as elected officials, but it starts with one person getting to know another person, playing with him, understanding that is no different than you are. It doesn't matter what beliefs he holds, what color is his skin. The way that we react with one another lowers the levels of hate. And I think it starts right there in the meeting point between different societies and different
As
kids.
a football fan, it's the first time I hear that football is a solution. It's been a problem for decades. Guys, Mayor Becker, Councillor Forbes, and Mr. Chayat, thank you very much for joining me for this panel.